Okay, all right. Okay, we're gonna get started this fireside chat here. Privacy, custody, and the future of institutional blockchain adoption. That's a mouthful. And I'm here joined by Eran Barak, CEO at Midnight Network, and Dustin Plett, Chief Sales Officer at Balance. And we're gonna talk about the partnership we just announced between Midnight and Balance. And Mauricio, your host today. Also head of product at Midnight. So happy to be with you guys. Before we jump into the meat of this discussion, I want to ask a few questions about more general approach and the context in which we all are operating. So we're bringing this to bear as part of the Midnight launch program. So how important to you, Dustin, is this partnership? I mean, I know Eran can elaborate for hours, but we would like to hear from an incoming partner. What's the meaning behind it? What are the goals and more of the basics as we break in.
So for those that don't know, Balance is Canada's oldest and largest qualified custodian. Been around since 2017. Recently qualified, which changed the game for us a lot, just because of what we can hold and what we can secure for our clients. Now we can hold anything from digital assets, which we've been doing since 2017, all the way to traditional stock, fiat. We can hold it all. So it really opens the door for a lot of new and exciting opportunities. Tokenized assets, or RWAs as we're calling them this week or this year, is a pretty good use case for the infrastructure of custodians, just like it has typically been for the last 100 years. The same role custodians played in tradfi, I suspect they will play when we're talking about this new asset class. We can hold the underlying assets. We can hold the tokenized assets. You can integrate with us, bring it to wherever the market is, wherever the liquidity is, wherever the price discovery is happening. We can manage those integrations. Midnight is the first blockchain that we've spoken to, and we've spoken to probably everybody that came to us with a well thought out plan of where things are going to be in the next 5 years. How do we future-proof this building now? And as much as you can future-proof anything, and that's really appealing to us. So our goal is to attract assets under custody and build services around those, make ourselves more valuable to our clients. Attracting the RWAs, or at least being a place where institutions feel comfortable working with and placing those assets, we believe is good for our business. So we believe Midnight's good for our business.
Ron, I think I can turn the same question to you, but in the Midnight lenses, what are the things that we are looking towards building with and for Balance?
So, 1, 2. Hi, folks. I actually came into the industry kind of through a little detour in financial services. I built a company called Symphony that was kind of connective tissue of financial institutions. So everything there was encrypted, but it was still centralized. And one day when there was a service outage, we almost ran some banks out of business because we were the kind of the critical infrastructure. And that made me think that blockchain is needed, because then you don't centralize, everything is decentralized and kind of independent of censorship and operation. But I was looking there at various use cases, including RWA, and it was clear that none of the existing TradFi RWA are going to make the leap into Web3 until we provide some basic kind of capabilities, what we call table stakes. These are privacy, because nobody wants to transact and have everybody in the world kind of see what they're doing with their assets. It is the predictability of cost, because you're not going to build an application where you don't know how much it's going to cost you to run it. And it's the service level assurance that you know the service will always be available. I think that once we bring those capabilities onto a blockchain, we're going to unlock a lot of these real world assets applications to come into play. And what I love about what Justin is doing with Balance is they understand that, and they understand how to weave RWA custody and all the capabilities that I'm sure he's going to talk to in a second around compliance and integrating some of that automation, and weave that in and take advantage of what blockchain really does.
Yeah, I want to double click on some of the things that institutions and regulators are interested in. Especially, I was chatting with Dustin right before this, and it was quite a journey to get to the certification and be a qualified custodian. In that journey, what were the roadblocks, or what are the things that appeared most evident to regulators that the industry has to solve, what you as a custodian to become a qualified custodian had to solve, and how does that play with privacy and integrity and resilience that Eran just kind of brought up?
Well, for the regulators, they had to wrap their head around what we were trying to do. And this is, we're a Canadian company, so I'm speaking from the Canadian perspective here. In 2021, there was some regulations that changed essentially 80% of client-held assets client-held assets, any assets you're holding on behalf of the clients had to be held with a qualified custodian. They hadn't defined what that meant yet. So that was a problem. That was a problem for us. Massive outflows, everything went to the US for a number of years. We were based in Toronto, had to move to a different jurisdiction so that we could actually work with the regulators in that environment. About a 3-year process to become a qualified custodian, and here we are. There was a lot of education back and forth. I mean, they basically took the model of a tradfi custodian and said, what are you doing that's the same, and what are you doing that's different? And if you are doing things that are the same, how are you doing them? And that was a lot of education. That was a big part of it. It's not as if we're doing anything really different. We're safeguarding assets, and we're acting as a trustee in that relationship. There's not, we're not rewriting the book or anything like that. We're just holding a different type of asset that is on chain or is digital, not in a filing cabinet. And that takes some education. That's essentially all it is. We're not breaking new ground by any stretch of imagination, and that's where I think a lot of the problems or a lot of the conversations that we're having, they can sometimes end prematurely because we're speaking one language or they're speaking another. The privacy is a good example of that. We talk about privacy a lot because we come from the blockchain side, we come from the crypto side. So we talk about the importance of privacy when it comes to these conversations with these institutions. The institutions say, they'll come to us and they say, well, we have these, internal policies that that we have to satisfy. We have these regulatory concerns. We have our client privacy issues or confidentiality issues. We call that privacy. They have a whole list of stuff they've been doing for the last 100 years that we just call privacy. And we're learning to talk the same language, but we're not quite there yet. If State Street or BNY walks into some of these conversations and says we have a solution, we'd have RWAs tomorrow. But the problem is they're not there yet. They're not speaking that language yet. But they will, and we'll get there.
I subscribe to the whole education thing, and I think it's incumbent upon us, the crypto industry, to continue to do that. Eran, you've been talking to enterprises about Midnight and about privacy and privacy-enhancing technologies. Besides their understanding or lack thereof of privacy, what are the other factors? You kind of brushed into a couple of factors that would unlock that institutional adoption. The predictability is a big one, and maybe we want to delve into a little bit of how we're trying to address that portion of the tokenomics equation.
So I want to touch on privacy first because I think what Justin just said is interesting. A lot of RWA and custodians that want to put tokenization of assets on chain without privacy essentially were relegated to using a private permission blockchain, and then you pretty much lose the reason why you even started using a blockchain. Might as well put it in a database and have some paper contracts. I think it is upon us to kind of introduce public chains that protect private data, private metadata, and enable the transactions. But the challenge that we found, and Mauricio, this is to your question, is protecting the metadata was not possible with the current thinking. So in order really to protect the transactions and what people are, kind of the identity of the people transacting and when they're doing exchange, you need to use a shielded asset to pay and kind of process the transactions on the network. And if you do that, you have an asset that potentially enables money laundering. Because if I, let's say, I'll take an example, Monero or Zcash, and I buy $100 worth of Monero and give it to Dustin, we just established money laundering. Everything is shielded. And regulators did not appreciate that or were sensitive to that. What Midnight realized is in order to solve this equation, we needed to separate the shielding from the token. So we've got a token that is unshielded, is a normal token that you would use in everyday life. And holding that token that is called Night generates a second resource called Dust that is shielded. And that's the one that pays the gas. The reason once you have two assets instead of one is you can put various restrictions on the shielded asset and thereby protect kind of the metadata and put that restriction so you avoid AML and other concerns. And that enables use cases like Dustin to kind of transact privately without violating any rules and regulations. But it also, Mauricio, to your point, enables the separation of kind of the tension between those who want to invest in a token and see the token go up and those that want price predictability to be flat. So once you have two assets, one can go to the moon and the other one could give you predictable pricing of using. So this kind of composite tokenomics really benefits all various kind of players on the chain, gives you the privacy, gives you cost predictability. It's really innovative kind of next step that I suspect a lot of blockchains will adopt this kind of model to do some interesting things.
Okay, so I'll turn this conversation into more of an industry roast, if you will. What does the traditional finance world get wrong about real world asset tokenization? What do they get right, and how do we as an industry can help them get there?
I mean, I think they get a lot of it right in that they say, what's the point? Right? I mean, I think that's a fair statement. What is the point of doing most of this? If we're going to tokenize things for the sake of tokenizing them, then I agree. What's the point? I can't make money off of that. They can't make money off of that. There's no market. There's not an exchange. There's no excitement. There's nothing to do. And unless we solve that problem someday, which isn't going to be this year, then there isn't. Then it's another solution looking for a problem. The tokenization of U.S. dollars makes a ton of sense, and that happened, and there's a ton of innovation around that. The next financial instruments that will be tokenized will probably make a ton of sense too. But we have people jumping all around. We're talking about tokenizing real estate when there's, where does that token actually live? Where's the price discovery on that? Is there a marketplace for that someplace? Until there is, I don't think there's a good argument for doing that yet. You can yell at me after if you think different. I'll just say this though. Every institution is different, and where we get a lot of things wrong on our side is we treat them like a monolith, and every company is at a different place. Every institution we talk to, is 5 years out or a few months out, or maybe they've got a working group that's actually digging into stuff and they understand where the industry is, and they're asking questions about what blockchain should we use, what is there an issue or partnership, what custodian should we be looking at. They're deep into the weeds and they're having those conversations, and that's great. But the institutions isn't a single monolith that are all at the exact same place. So that's something we often get wrong. There's folks that are very close to doing meaningful things, and there's folks that are 5 years out.
Your take on the same?
I don't think that TradFi is doing anything wrong. I would agree with Justin. I think we on the Web3 need to solve a few things. Justin and I were talking about before, where does the asset actually live, right? You say, okay, I'll tokenize some real world asset. Who's actually holding that asset while it's being tokenized? Who can guarantee that it's really there as a collateral? I think some of the players have not thought this through, have not thought through things like the ability to guarantee access and liquidity and kind of SLA. SLA is an interesting thing because, when you have an application like an RWA application running on Web 2, it's somewhere on Amazon, on Google, or somewhere, and that you always have access to it. The TradFi are counting on RWA and trad kind of web DeFi applications to always be there, and yet there is who you're going to call, right? If something fails, there's no throat to choke. You're thinking, okay, but there's not going to be really a server failure, right? We've got hundreds or thousands of nodes. The question turns to, can I guarantee that my transaction of real world asset gets on the next block? Because block producers can also decide not to include it, and then you are getting effectively a denial of service. We need to solve some of these things, and there are ways to do that. I know people are thinking, yeah, sure, we'll do some tips, right? And then you start getting a bidding war of who pays more to get their transaction on board, costs go out of control, all sort of chaos. We need to design better blockchains that would allow TradFi to feel comfortable that they can get on Web3 and have the same experience as SLA, guarantee the service is always available. Imagine you want to move your asset and it's just like nothing's happening. Same experience, cost control, privacy, table stakes for the industry to become real.
I love that. So I do have more questions, but I think this is all the time that we have. Any final thoughts and comments on the partnership and going forward?
I think it's a massive industry that is probably going to eclipse everything else in the next couple of years. We were talking earlier on a panel, there's anywhere between 10 and 15 trillion with a T assets under management that could be tokenized once we get on chain. There won't be any more DeFi or TradFi, there'll be just Fi, there'll be just assets on chain. We won't call them real world, it's just assets, everything will go there. What I like what Balance is doing is they really thought through all the things that make traditional RWA and other players really get comfortable with Web3 and blockchain. And I think they're opening the portal to faster adoption.
Yeah, that's great. And I would just say, if there's issuers out there, folks working in this space, especially with RWAs, and you want to have a conversation about what's available from an infrastructure perspective, how do you launch this thing? Where do the traditional assets that you may be tokenizing, where do they sit? What networks to use? I'm always happy to chat. I'm always happy to have those conversations. I actually enjoy those conversations more than a lot of the other conversations I have in this space, because I think RWAs are going someplace. It's just been taking a long time, but now a lot of the infrastructure is getting there. It's getting into place, and I think that a conversation with your local custodian is a good place to start. So happy to chat.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.